Hi, everyone. Hi, Ed Fam, and anyone else who has come to join me in this wonderful panel of women that we have here today. I'm going to start by first saying that teaching grit is racist, and that is the basis of the conversation today. But also, I want to acknowledge something that I've experienced since promoting this event. This is not a debate. And I'm going to ask that everyone, if you have very strong feelings, I'm happy to engage with you. But please remember that. And I also really love and appreciate the audience that I've been able to develop through equity. And I know that you all engage with the highest level of respect, but this is open to the greater world. So there's that. Just click background. But I'm going to kick us off because we have lots of friends and lots of my friends, and I want to introduce them to you all. So I'm going to start with, I'll start with Rashada because I've known Rashada the longest. Rashada is my line sister. We both pledged Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated at the University of Georgia, A to Xi chapter. Rashada is also an alum of Harvard Graduate School of Education, alongside all of the women on this call today. And she probably doesn't know this, but she was my push to actually apply and believe that I could go to Harvard. It was something I toyed with. Don't get emotional. I'm not going to get emotional.
You should have warned me.
But Rashada was definitely that push for me, and I felt that I could be seen in a space, especially by someone so close to me, being able to enter that space, and she entered it authentically, and love her. Carly, Reed, and Tommy are also alum of Harvard Graduate School of Education. We actually all graduated together in 2019, and I've worked with them in different capacities, while in school, but also beyond. I'm happy to call all of these ladies my friends and partners in this work. And please, 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 after this is over, I'm going to share their LinkedIn profiles. If you hear something that is really exciting to you, or you want to know more about the work that they're currently doing, Carly is a elementary school teacher. Rashada is working with a national nonprofit called Build as a program director. Reed is a head of school at Austin Discovery School. Really innovative model if that's something that piques your interest. And Tommy is a principal in residence with a charter network in New York. So all of these women have countless and wonderful things that they can share with you. But let's get started. On your screen, I'm sure some of you have taken the time to perhaps read this excerpt from Bettina Love's We Want to Do More Than Survive, but I'm going to read it aloud for everyone, and just let it sink in and sit with you for a second. So, grit is defined as passion and perseverance for long-term goals, according to characterlab.org. Dr. Love writes, teachers and school leaders need to abandon teaching students to embrace grit. Questioning whether African American kids have grit is not only trivial, but also deeply hurtful. Is 400 years not long enough to prove grit? We have rebelled, fought, confronted, pleaded with the courts, marched, protested, and boycotted, all just to survive in the USA. Grit is in our DNA. But measuring dark students' grit while removing no institutional barriers is actually the educational equivalent of the Hunger Games. Grit alone will not overthrow oppressive systems of power. We need teachers, school leaders, and policymakers to have grit for justice. Our focus as educators must shift from teaching grit to protecting our students' potential. Black and brown people deserve the right to use their grit, not to just survive, but to thrive. And taking that in, Dr. Bettina Love's work is definitely something that I lean on often as I evaluate my practice as an educator, and as I also evaluate the work I do supporting schools in different capacities. And one of the things that I hear all the time is, you know, just teach kids to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, right? This bootstrap mentality of, you know, it doesn't matter the hand you're dealt in life. You can achieve, you can attain this status of wealth or whatever it is that you aspire to. And we're often then like given images of Oprah Winfrey. Well, Oprah did it. She's a poor girl. She was a poor girl from the South, right? Or you're given the image of Beyonce. And I love Beyonce. And I admire her work ethic. But how many Beyoncés never got the opportunity to have their voice heard, to, or did not have the opportunity or the support systems in place? Because a lot, like, let's acknowledge it, Beyonce, despite how that two-parent household was structured, she had supports that gave her the opportunity that many Black and brown kids, specifically in the school I work in now, do not have. I have kids living with great grandparents, who may or may not have the capacity to jump those hurdles, who may or may not have the material wealth to forego a full-time job so that they can push their child's dreams ahead. So all of that to say, or get started with the question of, why do you ladies believe grit is racist? And anyone can chime in.
Thank you, Latrice. Thank you for reading the quote also. I read that book over the summer, but to just see that excerpt again is so, so powerful. I think that for me, reading that sometimes felt challenging because, you know, I'm Nigerian American. I don't know if there's other like second gen kids here, but that is how I was raised, to ignore your feelings. You push through, you do what you need to do, and you overcome, like, no matter what the circumstances are. But I think we don't talk about the impact that has on even the people that make it. Like, I don't know how to rest. I don't know how to say no. I don't know how to turn off. I have for so long been taught to like ignore my feelings, ignore what's going on in my body, my mental health, and to just keep going. And it's one thing if that is the way things used to be, but why are we spending money and resources in schools to train children to ignore their feelings? We should be teaching true self-regulation, like check in with yourself, check in with your body. What do you need to be okay in this moment? Not what I've seen, which is figuring out a way to calm them down so they can go back to doing their worksheet, which is what I've seen, the way that grit is mostly used in schools. And it's racist because other kids don't have to experience that. Only Black and brown children experience that type of hyper focus on controlling their bodies and relabeling like coercion and punishment through something that sounds sexier. You can get funding for grit when you can't get funding for other things.
I love that, Tommy. And one of the things that your comment made me think about is the idea of grit in isolation, which is largely what grit in education is taught to be, right? Like, despite everything that is designed to work against you, you must put your head down, you must accept it, and then you must then continue into your adulthood. Like you said, like, I'm not second gen. However, I was very much so taught, like, this is what you do. Like, you're at school, your teacher is saying, you know, you're not attaining this skill. You may be a kinesthetic learner, but they're not providing access to universally designed learning for you. So what do? You put your head down and you figure it out. And in adult life, that has manifested in so many ways. So thank you just for sharing that piece about how also it isn't something that stops at graduation, right? This idea of grit then becomes ingrained in children, and these children grow up. We grew up, right? Like, we're adults And now it's a matter of undoing years and years of trauma.
Yeah, I guess I'll go. To me, grit makes the assumption that people of color have to have some sort of superhuman strength just to make it to where white people are. And unfortunately, it doesn't take into consideration the systems of oppression that were put in place by white people. But yet, grit tells us that it's almost like the formula of what we need to be successful in a system that was never created for people that look like me in the first place. So it's just, to me, I agree so much about feeling like you have to just keep going and going and you don't know how to stop. And that has manifested in my adult life because I'm the type of person who will have 3 jobs at the same time just because I feel like I always have to keep going. And so it doesn't stop once we teach it to kids. It continues on.
And yeah, I think it just puts the onus on kids like yourselves to overcome these obstacles that are insurmountable. And it's also it gives the white educators who are giving you this formula some credit for your success if you become successful. And just another way that we think we can prescribe the solution to individual students and individuals to just make it through instead of actually working together to move the system in a better direction.
And adding on to that, thinking as a classroom teacher, I'm thinking about grit in terms of conversations we have about students and the supports that we think that they do or don't deserve. Kind of from both sides. Like, we have our kids who need, a multi-tiered system of support. We have our kids who should be getting enrichment in our gifted and talented program. And, just it's so subjective. And it is, like Reed, I appreciate you bringing that up, as a white teacher, talking to other white educators, about our Black students and the supports that they need, kind of just really thinking about the ways that grit comes into that conversation. Like, oh, well, their test scores aren't there. Well, let's look beyond that. Good, great. That's a really good start and is essential. But then if the conversation goes, well, are they hardworking in class? What's their behavior like? And then it kind of goes into that area. And I think that's where grit can manifest itself in those conversations, just about the supports that we're giving all of our students, some more than others.
And Carly, thank you, Reed, as well. Thank you for shifting us to what I want to talk about next is like, what are some ways you've seen grit weaponized in schools? Yes, grit is a weapon that we use to essentially explain away, like Carly was saying, explain away why as educators, we don't need to be more accountable. And I say we collectively, not as a Black educator, just educators all together. We say, okay, well, it can't be that we as educators failed to prepare them in K2. So now in 3-5, they are struggling. No, it must be the kids. It's the kids. They're not working hard enough. When in reality, they're working so hard that they're exhausted and they've disengaged, right? And in that capacity, I've seen grit become a very, very dangerous weapon of when educators, it's time to be accountable. It's like, well, they're not working hard enough. I did what I was supposed to do. Well, I have, and I'll drop facts. I'll drop numbers. Like, I'm in a classroom now as well. Rashada, shout out to having 2 and 3 jobs at once. But I have X number in, let's call my group of 4th graders. I'm looking at Carly's background in, right? In is equivalent actually to 39. When we count for the students who are receiving resource support for special education. Most of, let's pull out a percent. That's not really a 4th grade math That's not fourth grade math. However, let's plot a percent. 83% of them are reading more than one grade level behind. But we want to say, well, are they working hard? And then you weaponize grit against the teacher. Well, what are you doing or not doing? When in reality, it's a bigger question. Not saying that those teachers in K2 are bad teachers, but instead holding the system and the school accountable for what happened to where those educators, when those children were in K2, all of them have phonemic and phonics gaps, right? But it must be that every teacher in this building isn't working hard enough. And it must be that these kids aren't working hard enough. It can't possibly be that the curriculum we chose is racist. It can't possibly be that people that don't look like these children are making decisions on their behalf. It can't possibly be that. So shifting, sorry, got a little heated. I'll tell y'all about my day later. But what are some ways you all have seen grit weaponized in schools or beyond school? Because I know, like Rashada, you work with post high school, like post K-12 children now. So how have you seen it weaponized?
Well, when I think about this, I always go back to something that I experienced my first year teaching, and it was at a school, unfortunately, where the school leader was of color, but was experiencing his own internalized oppression. And because students didn't have enough grit, two Black males were demoted to a lower grade during the middle of the school year. And it absolutely blew my mind. I was like, wait a minute, you do this during the middle of the year, not at the end, not like midway through, during the middle of the year. And I just think about like how that impacts those students and just how their parents were experiencing internalized depression, or because they just didn't have the resources needed to give their students the proper supports. But it just baffles my mind that someone was able to do that. And I just think that like they thought that they were doing the right thing because the students weren't showing enough grit. Because compared to the students who were showing grit, they weren't putting forth enough effort. And that was the reason behind demoting the two students in the middle of the year. I don't think I'll ever get over that instance, just because it shouldn't ever happen. Point blank.
That's heavy. I think for me, grit connects to, especially in the example you just gave, to how Black children are treated like adults often, no matter how young they are, that you need to have a level of emotional control and constancy that even the adults who are taking care of you at school don't have. The teacher's allowed to yell at the kids and lose their temper, but like, heaven help us if a kid, snaps a pencil or gets really upset. But something I've seen schools that have grit scores. And so now, on top of all of like the testing and everything that we're doing so much of, like now, with white supremacy culture, if something can't be measured, then they figure out a way to measure it. And so, yeah, grit scores, it doesn't make any sense. It's not about, can this child use the supports to get what they need? Can they advocate for themselves? Can they use self-regulation strategies? No, it's about like, can they just fight through whatever you're throwing at them, even if they're not being supported? But the first time I saw that, my mind was just blown, and it kind of changed the way I look at SEL. Like I always have to ask myself, like, this looks good on the surface, but what is the purpose? Is the purpose to like actually heal our kids and to get them to grow emotionally? Or are we just trying to figure out a way to like control them so we can go faster with the curriculum?
Oh, Tommy, okay. Yes, a whole word, especially with SEL, and I won't spend much time just with this nugget. I will go as far as to say like these ideas of restorative practice and SEL have also been weaponized, just as grit has, to harm Black and brown students. And not saying that these things are weapons. I want that to be clear. But when we work as educators or as school districts or leaders, like whatever capacity we work in, and we want to have that stamp, right? We're an SEL school. We practice restorative justice here. And then it's like, but do you really? Do you really understand like what that means? Like, do you really understand that grit in it of itself is not a bad thing? And I teach my kids this all the time, right? Like connotation and syntax and the way a word is used. These things aren't bad innately, but how they are used then just brings on like a hailstorm of other issues. But I'm happy you brought up SEL and also thinking of restorative practices, because those things, when used inappropriately or used as a checkbox, are just as harmful as this idea of grit. Like, okay, just go sit in the corner and take a deep breath. That's not going to change the fact that you are in fifth grade and you are unable to access the content and that you are pissed about it. And rightfully so. I'm going to go on mute now.
I just wanted to share really quick, Tomi, I thank you for bringing that up. You know, as a classroom teacher, I'm definitely like right now in my head, I'm thinking about, you know, instances and conversations that I had even like today with my students, you know, around social emotional, you know, supports. And, you know, what you said, are we supporting them in that moment to really heal and to really get the support that they need? Or are we just, you know, trying to get them to get over it so they can get back to the worksheet, to get back to the activity, you know, and that's just something that I'm definitely going to be sitting with and teasing apart and, you know, being mindful of, you know, going forward in my own classroom. So I just wanted to say thank you. I'm like really marinating with that.
To piggyback on that, you know, at Austin Discovery School, we do boast a pretty, you know, strong social emotional learning program. I think our director is really the key to it. I think we do a pretty good job, I'll say myself, but there's always room for growth, right? And always room for reflection. Particularly what we do is all of our new staff join a cohort, and it's a lot of self-work. It's a lot of reflecting on how do you keep your composure in these hard situations, and how do you assume positive intent of your kids and check yourself. And you know, it's multifaceted, but a lot of it is just about self-work. And I think that's what especially white educators need to be doing, is really examining how their biases come in, how they're quick to react to kids. I mean, the problem isn't with the kids, the problem is with the educators in so many instances, or not just the educators themselves, like you said before, the system and kind of how that, how we bring those things into the classroom.
Thank you for sharing that, Reed. I feel like the times where I feel taken care of are the times that I'm able to be there for my students in the way that they need. And I think that doing SEL right, like it sounds like your school's doing a lot of great things, is about teaching kids to name their emotions, teaching kids to be aware of what they're feeling and what they need. And that's when I've seen SEL work, right? When suddenly I hear a student saying, "I'm feeling anxious right now," or I'm feeling frustrated, or I'm feeling this and that, and like giving them the tools to express themselves and to identify their feelings. And I think if you're looking at SEL curriculums, like that's what you should be looking at, and that's how we should be evaluating things. Not are we just teaching kids to push through and to not think about how something makes them feel.
And I'm sure everyone can see, like, I've highlighted this comment by Jasmine. Thank you, Jasmine. Jasmine says, like, she's watched her school change the sign on the in-school suspension room to the Restorative Practices Center, and nothing else has changed. And I'm happy that you shared that comment, Jasmine, because that really moves us into it's like a bridge between like what we're talking about and where I want to go with our conversation next. Like, what are like alternatives to grit? Like, what does it look like in theory, but specifically what it looks like in practice? And I think that, Jasmine, your comment really highlights for us the application of, I get this intellectually, right? And I think as educators and as people who have attained some level of, education beyond our K-12 experience, it's easy for us to sit in the theory and then to do a really crappy job at implementing things in practice. And in our brain, we are thinking, well, my intent was good, but it's like, okay, but what was your impact, right? Like you get it here, but how is it manifesting in your practice? And that is a perfect illustration. And not to say that whoever changed this sign is a bad person. I don't know them, honestly. Like, I can't assign value to their character and who they are as a person. But what it sounds like is they're thinking, ooh, this sounds bad. Instead of, this sounds bad, this idea is bad. And now I need to shift not only the name, like that's tertiary, right? Like, I need to shift how we as adults engage with dealing with behavior in our school. So I would love to hear from you all. Like, what does this look like specifically, like in practice? Because I always want to leave my my friends, my ed fam, like, okay, how do I begin to make this shift?
I think it is a lot of that self-work that I was just talking about, and starting to recognize when conversations like those about grit start creeping into your dialogue, like Carly was saying, with other teachers, and when you start to see these things seeping in, and how you can kind of stop that and question it and think critically, and then making sure that you're creating space for students to do the same. I also think giving kids the room to explore and to find what their passions truly are and what brings them a sense of purpose matters a lot. We can push them towards our preset goal of, get this math equation done or whatever. But if that's not something that's truly, truly what brings them joy and purpose, then that's not going to do anything. So really, actually, instead of pushing kids in one narrow direction, giving them space and giving them a chance to breathe and explore what makes them them and celebrate what makes them who they are.
A small practice I've seen that has worked really well. A lot of classrooms have like a timeout space or a peace corner, but there's no conversation about it until there's an issue and, go take a break, but really it's timeout. It's the same thing with a new name. One really what powerful thing I've seen is teachers at the beginning of the year or throughout the year have every single child go to that space and experience it, and try the different tools, whether it's the headphones, the putty, the snow globe with the glitter, whatever the different tools are there. And so it kind of sets the expectation that everyone needs a break sometimes. And you don't actually need to be in trouble to go there. You can go there, ask the teacher, you go there and you come back and, do your work. But kind of creating that classroom culture of we all need to take care of ourselves sometimes just because. There doesn't need to be a problem. And I think there's a fear that these things will be abused. But the same can be said for anything that you do in a classroom. Like a piece of paper can turn into a paper airplane or a missile. So I think good educators know how to introduce fun things into their classroom.
Yeah, exactly, Tomi. That makes me think about when I first created a calm down corner in my classroom, and I had all these ideas of things to, this journal with prompts and, the sensory things. And I was literally told, well, you don't want to make it too fun. You don't want kids to want to go there. And, thinking about that now in the context of our conversation, I'm like, what a missed opportunity to positively reinforce taking a break when you need it, figuring out, what you need to, figure out your emotions, communicate your emotions, heal from whatever is going on. It should be fun. And, I'm realizing that it's problematic that, that was kind of the angle that I have created the cool down corner in my classroom. It's what a missed opportunity to kind of address, the racism around grit and not, taking a break and not listening to your social emotional needs and all of that. Mm-hmm.
I think it does go back to teachers being aware of their internal biases, and being aware of their own self-identity, because those cool down and take a break spaces are great. But what happens when it's the same students that continue being sent there over and over? And then that goes back to the biases and the systems of oppression that we're all living in. And so I think it really does take a lot of internal work. And I'm big on data as well. So like track who's going there, and then allowing the teacher to really think, what is it? What are some of the triggers that the students have, but what are some of the triggers that you as the educator has that sends you to that point to where you want to send a student to take a break? Because sometimes it's not always the kids. A lot of times it's not always the kids.
Yes,
so
ma'am.
just being aware of that, and that goes back to being self-reflective.
Yeah, I thank you all for all of those just like simple practices, because I think, one of the larger challenges, at least I know as an educator, is when this new practice, or when it's time for me to reframe or shift a mindset, it becomes really daunting. And then it's like, okay, we are going to, I just give something that many educators can relate to, guided reading, right? Last year, we used Sally's guided reading curriculum. This year, we got something new, y'all. We're using Tommy's guided reading curriculum. And I have to learn a completely different system, but I'm accountable for this new complete system, but I haven't had time to digest. And thinking about like the small shifts, the small practices that can help shift, the work that we want teachers, or, like we hope teachers are going to do after this this event. I think about modeling, right? Like modeling using the calm down corner, modeling saying, this is really frustrating, or modeling saying, I didn't have a good night, I didn't sleep well. And instead of modeling that toxic positivity of everything's fine, nothing ever goes wrong, everything's perfect, I'm going to work hard and push through the day, giving that to children, and then modeling, okay, I just got frustrated. I really thought this lesson was going to go differently, guys. I thought that I had prepared something to meet you where you were. I didn't. I'm going to go use the calm down corner, right? Like, it's me. Like, I need to calm down. And because I think, and with that, just highlighting Rashad is like, tracking who you send there, but also thinking about, in doing that, why am I sending a child here? That's a part of like self-regulation. Like, yes, sometimes there may be like a physical like outburst or something, and that child may need to be spatially separated, right? Or they may need to have a comfort tool. But really thinking about, why is it a practice that the only time a child goes to this space is when I send them there? Because that's an indicator, like talking about data, that's an indicator of if that social emotional learning is actually sticking, or is it just a checkbox, right? Like, am I regulating, or am I being regulated? And a lot of times, I thinking about grit, our children, like they put their heads down, like, I can keep doing this, I can keep doing this, because Miss Lau said I can do it. Miss Myers, Miss Melvin, Miss Ramirez, everyone says I can do this. But now I'm in the real world, right? And no one's telling me I can do this. I go to college. My professor doesn't care if I can do it or not. They don't have the competencies that we work so hard to instill in K-12 educators necessarily. Now what? There's no one cheering me on. I don't know how to regulate. And so I know we're getting close to time. And I'm going to ask before we go into our last question that I have for the panel is, if you are watching, thank you. And if you have any questions, anything that you would like to share, go ahead and put it in the comments. We can see them live. And we're more than happy to spend a few minutes after we finish with our set conversation to engage around the questions that you have. So if there's a question you have, feel free. Also, I'm right by my phone. So if you don't feel comfortable sending it to where everyone can see it, feel free to message it to me through my, I can't even remember my own Instagram handle. It's Consult Equity, or through Facebook message. But for my panel, last question for the evening. What advice would you give a fellow educator who is trying to shift their mindset around grit? And I will point out that you all have done this already, but if you could have like a tweet long, what's that, 140 characters? Wow. Am I old, y'all? Okay. However long a tweet is. What would you say? If you could tweet something? Specifically, tweet a piece of advice to another educator.
Teachers talk too much. That's why we have a hard time coming up with a tweet. I need a minute.
It's funny that you say that, because what I was thinking about as my advice is ask students what they want, don't judge, listen, and then provide them with the supports they need to achieve it. Probably more than 140, but it's there.
I would say speak up when grit culture shows up in your school, whether the word grit itself is used or not.
Look at you. That was less than 140 characters. Yes. I love it.
I'm thinking along the lines of specifically like what Reed has shared, just something, never stop reflecting, asking, criticizing yourself, and, asking a lot of the verbs, basically reflecting, on your own biases and your own practice and your own impact.
Think about the classroom culture you're trying to create, or the school culture you're trying to create, and stop and see if that's what's happening. Check in with your kids and check in with yourself.
You all did so well with the 140 characters. You all should see me writing tweets. It's ma'am, negative, and it's red. It's like that red pen. Some teachers still use that. I don't grade with red. Personal choice, but yeah. But what I would say is work on you. And I was speaking with someone who I consider a friend and a colleague earlier this evening, and she said something that really just codified something else I'm working on and I want to share with the world soon, which is you had your racial ethnic identity first. Being an educator is something that came much later in your development as a person. And it's not a tweet, by the way. This is a Facebook status. And not the ones that, that show up really big. It's the kind that they shrink down nowadays. But you had your racial ethnic identity prior to becoming an educator. Being an educator is a new part of your identity. And don't lose sight of who you are in how you are showing up in the world, and also with the privileges that may have come with your new identity, or the privileges your racial ethnic identity has previously afforded you. And I am going to, we had 3 questions. Okay, so enough of me and my long tweets. That was like a thread. The first question is, how do you feel about Black educators becoming deans to control children? Quick for this, Kimmy, I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly, or if not, please feel free to hit me up like, girl, that's not how you say my name. But I want you to stay tuned for later on in this month. There will be a series of these live series, and I'm going to talk about the profound additional impact that Black educators can have, both positively and negatively. Because I feel like it's something that's not often talked about. But for her question, Tomi has something.
Oh, this was triggering. When I saw it, I have been mostly in the charter school world, and I see this over and over and over and over again. And I think it's just replicating like the plantation dynamics where there, is like an overseer who's, working to control the children. Like a school leader will see that someone maybe has a very strong personality in a good way and will like exploit that and encourage them to like lean into their ability to control children, not give them training on social emotional learning or how to teach kids how to self-regulate, take care of themselves. They just keep pushing and pushing them to like do whatever it takes to control the children. And that will lead to promotions if you're someone who is like good at it and is going to continue doing that. And then it kind of leads to a blueprint. And then people see like, oh, okay, that's what I need to do if I want to, have an impact outside of the classroom in a different way. I need to be like that as well.
And I'll just wrap up your question, Kemi, with I think it's a lot less about a role that you have, and more so like the role of a dean, because like I've been in both charter and traditional public schools, and I have spent quite a bit of time in independent schools or private schools as well. And I think that even if it's not a codified role, there's often an educator, a Black educator, especially in schools that are that have a more like a mixed racial ethnic identity or racial ethnic mix of staff. So there's often this like a Black educator that becomes like, send them to her or to him, and it's forced upon them. And I think that that is also something that we have to consider when thinking about like controlling. Like, it's not only a particular educator's skill set that often leads them to this place of being a dean to control students. It's often the inability of others to effectively engage with students. So that's just another thought that I have. Happy to talk more if you like. And then we have 2 more questions. One from Mary Beth. Also, what was the book author? Oh, that was easy. I'm going to put that in the chat for you. Not the chat. This is not a chat box. This is a comment thread. I am going to put it here. You all can see. Like I did 8 hours on Zoom today with my kids. So I still think I got the chat box going. But I am going to read Kareem's question. Hey, Kareem. Kareem is also an Hugsy alum of this school leadership program. And we love Kareem. He asks, I'll read his whole comment. I think we have a complicated relationship with grit as educators because we can worry often about the experiences that they will have in the future. How do I avoid creating grit culture while still giving students a critical lens with which to persevere through potentially unsupportive, uncaring environments ahead? And Kareem, thank you. And I think that's the work, right? Like, it's identifying that grit can be weaponized, just like persevering can be weaponized, like just telling a kid push through it. Or what I hear so often now in the pandemic, kids are resilient. Yes, and that doesn't mean that you should be insensitive to the fact that it's a pandemic, right? Like, just because they're resilient doesn't mean that we can just like completely ignore the wholeness of what they need right now. And I think, like, how do you avoid creating that grit culture? I think it really lies in that, or personally, I think it lies in that ability to keep it real with your kids, right? Like, this is hard. Life can be hard, but life doesn't have to be this hard, because there are systems and institutions in place that we can work hand in hand we can work hand in hand in dismantling. But unfortunately, like right now, as it is today, it's messed up. Like, giving, or at least in my opinion, is like speaking truth to the wholeness of the situation and honoring, like, yes, this is hard. Yes, this is unfair. And if I had it my way, I would do school a lot differently than how it currently exists. But yeah, that's just my thought. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think we have to do a better job of equipping students with some of the tools that they need to just be critical of the world. And then also take one step further and help support them in, if they think something is wrong, well, then how are they going to actively express that in a way that will actually make positive change? So, like, there's so many young activists out here. Like, we should be making sure that if students feel like they are being treated some sort of way, that they are given the skills they need to advocate for themselves. Most kids are silenced as opposed to heard. And so give them the space to speak. They know what they need.
Totally. And I mean, this is the same thing as that. But, you know, a kind of quick way that I wrap my head around that idea is to think that we need to teach our students to both navigate and transform the systems of oppression in which they live, right? Which I think kind of addresses that question as well. Yeah, so just navigate and also transform, which I know is very theory, not practice-based, but I feel like you really hit on that well. So not much to add to that.
I would just add moving to more collective action and working together rather than focusing on individuals and how individuals can navigate or overcome. How can we work together and making that, again, part of your school and classroom culture.
I think, Kareem, what you shared resonates with me a lot. And something I try and check myself with is, am I like lecturing and putting pressure, or am I providing tools and skills to help people like grow and navigate? Because it's hard. It's hard to actually like give people what they need. And the reason I think that this conversation is even happening, it's a lot easier to tell someone to push through, and it's hard to figure out a new way of doing things. It's not easy. And I appreciate that everyone here is like acknowledging that it's not just like, okay, go. There's a lot of like unlearning we have to do and figuring out together.
Yes, Tommy. And with that, I'll wrap us up and leave us with this. Like, the goal of today wasn't to completely shift how people view grit. I, like Tommy and Kareem, because of how I have been indoctrinated, right? I struggle with, like, grit is my default. And I have to actively, and it takes work, a lot of work, like right now, like if I'm being completely transparent with y'all, like I have developed a headache in a way, not a bad headache, but just like my wheels are like really turning. I'm like, you know what? Reflecting on little instances of how I could have perpetuated grit culture, even today in my work the work that I've done today. But really highlighting what Tommy said is like it's a process of unlearning, and this is not a process that any educator committed to this work knows there's an endpoint for. There's no way, we're not arriving in a place. I'm actively doing this work alongside all of the wonderful people on this panel tonight, alongside every educator who has chosen to will engage with this panel, this conversation. We're unlearning and we're learning, and then one day we'll be not one day, hopefully very soon, we'll be unlearning again. And it's a process. It's not a linear process either. It's real bumpy. It's ups and downs. There's a lot of me work. If anyone like has followed me for a while, like you'll hear me talk about like the me work that needs to be done. But yeah, it's not an answer. It's more so a calling to your attention that grit is not inherently a bad thing, but when we use it as the Band-Aid to cover up and allow systems of oppression to continue, we have turned it into a weapon against the most vulnerable children, the children farthest from opportunity in our country. So with that, I love you all. I love you, my panel. I am so happy I got to see you all today. It's so good to see like faces of people who are like, you know, like with you after you've had like trying experiences. So you've done more for my soul than I could ever say today. And thank you. I will be in touch, and also to my panel, because I know the women, the educators you are, send me those addresses. They know what I'm talking about. They're going to try to get out of it, but send them to me. Everyone else, thank you. And I look forward to being in conversation in this series with you soon. Good night.